Muito boa tarde, good afternoon to all of you. Queria agradecer a presença de todos os nossos convidados, our dear guests and our speakers. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. I will make an introduction in both English and Portuguese. I know many of you understand Portuguese. Portanto, hoje estamos aqui para participar na conferência online que tem o título, in English, the title of this conference is the Recovery Plan in the EU in the Post-COVID Era. And thank you again for being with us. On my right, Lina Lopes, vice-presidente do Instituto Francisco Sá Carneiro, obrigado por estar connosco, deputada à Assembleia da República. À minha esquerda, Nuno Matias, vice-presidente do Instituto Sá Carneiro também. No meio da sala está também João Montenegro, também vice-presidente do Instituto Sá Carneiro. Eu vou fazendo a introdução dos nossos convidados à medida que forem falando. I will introduce the speakers when they will be speaking. We will begin with Maria da Graça Carvalho. We will have some opening remarks with Maria da Graça Carvalho, member of the European Parliament and President of the Institute Francisco Sá Carneiro. I guess we can maybe start. Maria da Graça Carvalho, are you ready for us? I give you the floor or the screen. I guess Maria da Graça Carvalho is not ready yet. So okay, then I will give, not the floor, but the screen to Johan Hofmeister, Director of Adenauer Foundation. Por favor, já sei que fala em português ótimo. Pode começar, obrigada.
Então, devo falar umas poucas palavras. Okay. Bom, gostaria de cumprimentar a todos, deputado Paulo Rangel, a senhora Scholl, da Alemanha, deputada Carvalho e todos que participam. Grande prazer para nós, a Fundação Konrad Adenauer, participar neste debate sobre o EU Recovery Fund, o Fundo de Recuperação da União Europeia. Sabemos que todos os estados na União estão afetados fortemente pelo vírus e que, infelizmente, as nossas economias estão com muita pressão, com muitos problemas e afortunadamente, digamos, felizmente, os líderes europeus, no seu encontro em julho, encontraram novas fórmulas de solidariedade, de cooperação com os estados mais afetados, mais vulnerados, digamos, do problema do vírus. E por isso, acho que agora, nesse momento, todos os estados estão preparando as suas políticas, as suas economias para poder investir os fundos que devem ser livres a partir do próximo ano, mas nesse momento temos ainda alguns debates complicados, tanto no contexto do Conselho Europeu como no Parlamento Europeu, para aprovar os recursos e as medidas, e acho que esse debate hoje vai contribuir ao debate sobre o Fundo de Recuperação, sobre as políticas portuguesas e europeias. E gostaria de agradecer ao Instituto Sá Carneiro pela iniciativa na pessoa da sua presidenta e expressar o nosso agradecimento por participar nesse debate tão pertinente e relevante nesse momento. Muito obrigado.
Obrigada. Eu aproveito para agradecer também ao Instituto por nos receber aqui na Casa da Cerca em Almada, com uma vista maravilhosa, hoje com algum vento, não está fácil, mas é sempre maravilhosa, como podem ver ali nas nossas imagens. Eu não sei se a Maria da Graça Carvalho já estará pronta, não está ainda pronta, estão-me a indicar que não está, portanto já está, pronto. As maravilhas do direto e destas novas tecnologias, todos nós nos estamos a habituar. Maria da Graça Carvalho, como está? Tudo bem? Faça favor então de fazer as honras
da Muito boa tarde, peço desculpa, mas estava a tentar resolver os problemas de comunicação, tanto com o Sr. Arguiru como o Sr. Blanchard, que estão a tentar ligar, e portanto peço imensa desculpa. Estava-vos a ouvir, mas dei prioridade a tentar resolver estes problemas de ligação. So, good afternoon to all, and I'm sorry that I didn't enter because I was trying to solve the Zoom problems to link with the two other speakers that are having some problems in the connection. Welcome to our debate. The exceptional circumstances created by the COVID-19 pandemic forced Europe to react strongly. The Next Generation Europe Recovery Plan will be a bold response to the economic consequence of the coronavirus. The challenges are enormous, but the means made available to the member states allow us to face the future with optimism. For many countries, Portugal included, this response to the crisis is a rare opportunity to take long-needed measures that, if well implemented, will allow not only to start the recovery, but also to create the foundations of prosperity and competitiveness for the coming decades. Together, with the immediate response to the consequence of the pandemic, this plan has a major objective, which is to ensure the future sustainability of the Union with a focus on ecological and digital priorities. However, it will be up to the member states to devise their own strategies. Moreover, they will have ample scope to do so. The options now taken will be essential for us to have a European Union that is more prosperous, more competitive, and with a great convergence between member states. Portugal is in the last phase of preparation of its plans. Today, we will have the opportunity to learn about and to discuss other plans that are already in advanced stage of development. The realities are different from Portuguese. However, there are important points of contact. My expectation is that we can draw some good examples from this debate, both in terms of priorities and practices. We will discuss the realities of other member states and of the European Union as a whole. To that purpose, we are fortunate to have a panel that is extremely qualified and very much involved in these matters. Kirsten Scholl, Director General for European Policy at the German Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy. Olivier Blanchard, Professor at the Patterson Institute for International Economics and former Chief Economist at the IMF. And Michel Aguirre, Member of the Board of the European Stability Mechanism and Chair of Greece Council Economic Advisors. Helena Tecedeiro, our moderator, is editor at the Diário de Notícias, a very prestigious newspaper in Portugal. The open statement was done by William Hofmeister, director of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, to whom I'm deeply grateful for the support given to this initiative. My fellow MEP Paul Rangel, Vice President of the EPP political group, also a sponsor of this event, will give us a vision of the European Parliament. The conclusions of the debate will be made by Joaquim Sarmento, head of the PSD Strategic National Council. To close the event, we will hear the president of our party, PSD, Partido Social Democrata, Mr. Rui Rio. To all of you, I would like to say thank you for making the time to share your knowledge and experience with us. We are all aware of how busy your schedules can be, and how important your occupations are. It is an honor to have this panel. Let me finish with a few words in my mother language, Portuguese. É também uma honra contar com a colaboração do Conselho Estratégico Nacional do PSD na organização deste debate sobre um tema tão importante para o futuro de Portugal. Agradeço ao professor Joaquim Sarmento a disponibilidade permanente para trabalhar em conjunto com o Instituto Sá Carneiro. Uma das grandes missões do Instituto é ser uma fonte de ideias para o país. E estou certa que sairemos deste encontro e deste debate com bons contributos, em termos de estratégia e em termos de execução. Este evento representa muitas das prioridades que temos para o futuro. Abertura à sociedade civil, internacionalização, um foco constante nas questões de interesse nacional. E espero que todos desfrutem deste momento. Muito obrigada a todos.
Obrigada. Thank you very much. You did all the work for me, so I don't even have to present our speakers, our guests today. Just before we go to our panel and to our debate, I will give the floor to Paulo Rangel, Vice President of the EPP. Paulo Rangel, por favor.
Muito obrigado. Antes do mais, eu naturalmente queria saudar todos os presentes. Farei já, daqui a pouco vou mudar para inglês, no sentido de poder dar aqui uma perspectiva que os nossos conferencistas possam acompanhar, mas queria agradecer muito o convite, quer de Vida Hofmeister, quer da Maria da Graça Carvalho, que ambos conheço muito bem, a ambos devo muito, para estar presente aqui hoje e para o fazer, sinceramente, não apenas em nome do PSD, mas também em nome do grupo PPE, que aposta muito neste tipo de iniciativas por toda a Europa, e, portanto, queria agradecer isso. So I will turn to English now in order to give at least some, I'd say, possibility of our panelists, our members of the panel, of understanding what we are saying here. So first I would like to say that it's for me an honor to be here with you. This is probably, you are not aware of that, but it's a major occasion for the Portuguese, I would say, economic and political communities and to our civil society. So as Graça has said, we also would like to thank you very much for your availability and your generosity. Going very, very straightforward to 2 or 3 main ideas about the recovery plan. I must say that when the pandemic started, the first institution to think about and to approve a resolution on a recovery fund, it was the European Parliament. And it was, we have done this in very difficult conditions. We were negotiating via Zoom and via WebEx and via, so online for the first time ever. It was very, very tough negotiations, but there was something that was totally new. For the first time, all across the 4, I'd say, more pro-European groups, EPP, S&D, Renew, Liberals, and Greens, the members from southern member states and northern member states voted for a solution where there was some degree of mutualization. And all the negotiations were very, very difficult because it was very, very hard to convince our colleagues inside the different groups, especially from what we call today the frugal states, and also some from Germany, to vote in favor of that. And it was an amazing process. I must say that they were very cooperative. They really understood that we were in a very, very crucial moment for the history of the European Union and for the history of our economies. And so this was a first move. Then we also welcome very much the move of President Macron and Chancellor Merkel that gave a boost to this idea. And then Ursula von der Leyen, that I believe since the very first moment was very happy with this move of the European Parliament, she could go forward and together with President Michel to present the proposal that in July was finally approved. I must say that we are still not sure of what is going to happen afterwards, because we need at least 27 national ratifications, more than 20 of them in national parliaments. Some parliaments have given ambiguous and not clear signs if they agree or don't agree with the proposal that was made by the Council, the European Council. European Parliament is very, I'd say, focused on the issues of rule of law, and rule of law proved to be a kind of alliance between the Frugals and Hungary and Poland, because these two groups of countries, one because they think rule of law should be much more tougher, and others because they think that rule of law should not be associated to this recovery plan. And I believe that this has some potential to create still a lot of problems, and I wouldn't say to kill the idea of the recovery fund, not at all, but to cause some delays. And as you know, we are in such a situation today all across Europe, but especially in the countries that have a high debt and that were very much affected by this pandemic. I'm not speaking in health terms, but in economic terms, that I believe that this could be any month that we lose, that we waste, I'd say, it will be a tragedy in economic terms. But anyway, I must say that I'm very proud to see that this time European Union managed to respond in a quicker manner, in a faster manner, in a much more united manner. It is a very difficult process, but I can tell you, even within the parliament, inside the parliament, we had a terrible fight that ended with a fantastic agreement that was quite balanced, quite ambitious, but quite balanced, trying to understand everybody. I would conclude these remarks with, I'd say, a concern that is a very huge concern among Portuguese population, I'd say, not among political class, but among the Portuguese population. That is, we want this money to be well spent. And this is really the main concern. Because when we see some of the ideas that, for instance, now the Portuguese government is proposing, some are quite good. I'd say they are in line with the Commission, but we risk to make some mistakes that we made in the past. That is to have a boost, but only for 2 years, because it's focused in public consumption and not really in a sustainable economic development. And here I think that European institutions could have a strong role, helping the countries, controlling in a very, very clear manner how the money is spent, because this is a unique opportunity to, let's say, the majority of the countries, and we should not lose it, we should not waste it. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to follow very, very, very intensively your dialogue and your remarks.
Thank you very much, Paulo João. Well, everyone was... Sorry. Got it. The money was spent. Well, I guess it's everybody's concerned. We are all concerned about it, and our countries are going to spend this huge amount of money. We will now have our panel, and I'm sure Olivier Blanchard, Christian Scholl, and Michael are going to talk a little bit about that. We will start with Olivier Blanchard. Professor Blanchard, how are you? Since yesterday, we talked yesterday. can you give us your view on this recovery plan and how can countries spend well their money to make sure we are going to overcome this COVID crisis? I just have one thing to say. You have 10-15 minutes each of you, so please, Professor Bouchard. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have two technical problems. The first one is the sound from you is very bad, so I may not get the questions if there are questions. The second is that I've prepared a slide and I was happy to share my screen, but I've been disabled. So if somebody can do something, it would be great.
Okay, I guess
okay, I'm going to wait a few seconds. Can you do something? Can somebody do something?
We're trying to. I guess it's almost done. It's done.
Okay, let me try. That's good. That's perfect. Good. Well, I'm very happy to participate in this discussion. I think it's a really important discussion. So I thought I would just start with some remarks on where we are and what policies we're thinking about for the next few years. The first point is that I do not know about the recent numbers for Portugal, but in many countries, the numbers have been quite good, better than was expected, a very fast recovery. And this has led a number of people to be optimistic about what was going to happen, kind of a so-called V-shaped recovery. And I think we should not be fooled. It is a mechanical rebound. Basically, a lot of activities were closed and they're reopening. And, you know, the downturn was very strong and the upturn is very strong as well. But that's, I think we're seeing the end of that. And I'm much less optimistic about what comes now than some of the forecasts. In thinking about things, I think we have to consider two different horizons. One I've called pre-vaccine and the other I've called post-vaccine. This is taken to be a metaphor for, you know, as long as COVID is relevant and constrains activity, and post-vaccine is when we can basically ignore COVID and just do whatever we want. I think there has been a change. There was a sense, I think, when policies were designed earlier this year, that it would happen and then we would have a vaccine and the page would be turned and we would be back to some kind of normal. I think what we're learning is that the vaccines are not going to be perfect, but it's going to take a while to actually get them on board, to get them produced and distributed, and it's going to be a fuzzy border. So I still think that the expected value of the pre-vaccine phase is probably up to the middle of next year, but government should be planning for longer. It could well be that by the end of next year, we're still not in any kind of normal state. I give more probability to this than I did a few months ago. But the point is, during the pre-vaccine phase, we still have many supply constraints, which are not going to go away. You know, it goes from restaurants to tourism to so on. And we're likely also to have low demand. People are still very scared. There is likely to be precautionary saving. Firms are likely to be very careful with investment plans for a while. They need the liquidity. They don't know how long they'll need it. They prefer to keep it in cash rather than invest. So I think aggregate demand, to use the usual term there, may be very low. And this means for both reasons, we're going to have lower supply in part of the economy because of constraints, and maybe lower demand everywhere in the economy because consumers and firms are not willing to spend more. So I think that's what we have to deal with. This is the priority. This is the urgency. Again, it should last, hopefully, something like 6 or 9 months, but it could last longer, and we have to be ready for it. Once we are in the post-vaccine phase, and COVID is the side issue, then we'll still have to think about a number of things. The reallocation, COVID has changed many ways in which we do business, and many of those will remain even when we can go back to the old ways. And then there are going to be legacy effects, and the main one is going to be higher public debt. I can think of a few others, but I think that's the one that is most concerning potentially. So this is how I see things. Let me now turn to implications for policy during what I call the pre-vaccine phase, and then the policy for the post-vaccine phase. So for the pre-vaccine phase, I think monetary policy I'm going to leave aside because it's not done in Portugal. I think the ECB is doing the right thing of providing liquidity, having very low rates. So I'm going to focus on fiscal. And the fiscal policy, I think, has to have two goals, which are quite different. They're related, they help each other, but they're not the same. The first one is to protect the sectors which, once we have a vaccine, should go back to normal. And once we have a vaccine and people can have access to it, there's no reason to think that restaurants or hotels are going to be very different in the customers they have. Same thing for tourism. I think tourism will come back in a big way. And so the idea is, if we don't do anything, then many of these firms are going to go bankrupt before it's time to actually start again. And so we have to help these firms, we have to help these sectors, we have to help the firms, and we have to help the workers who work in these firms. And there it's basically protection. So it's a mix of, it depends on the country, but of unemployment benefits, of grants and loans to affected firms. You'd like to give loans, but the risk is that if you do this for too long, then the loans will make the firms insolvent. And so the right mix is a complex one, but clearly it has a grant component in it, a gift component in it. And that's what governments have to deal with at this point, how generous to be, in what form. This is going to help aggregate demand, because when you give money to the unemployed or you give money to firms, they're likely to spend more, but it may not be enough. It may be that aggregate demand will be too low. And so fiscal policy may have to help aggregate demand, as it would in a conventional recession, but it has to be ready to do it. And this might become the issue later this year or early next year. And again, I think there the issue is, it's contingent. I do not know what will happen. Nobody knows what will happen to aggregate demand. It can be very weak, maybe not. And so what you want to have is measures which allow you to respond if needed. And in that sense, I think we'll come back to the recovery plan. The recovery plan is a great thing, but it is not very flexible and it doesn't have that kind of horizon. And the risk is, if you try to spend money now, it's going to be badly spent, as Paolo was suggesting before. So this is about fiscal monetary policy, yes, and no issue. The ECB is doing the right thing and will continue to do it. Now let me turn to post-vaccine. How different is the world going to be? And here my view is not incredibly different. We'll probably largely go back to the way we were doing business. There are going to be differences. Telework is something we've all discovered, and one day we'll know how to use Zoom, right? But we're getting there. This is going to change the shape of cities, the geographic location of business, the organization of firms. I don't think that's an enormous issue. It's going to happen the same way as, technological change has changed things in the past. I don't think it's a big issue. We'll just see it happen. It will not happen overnight. It just has to be monitored and helped if needed. The other legacy of this crisis is a higher public debt. And here, as some of you may know, I have fairly strong views on this, which is that at this stage, given how low interest rates are, and I am betting that they will remain low for some time, decreasing debt going into fiscal austerity at this point would not be the right thing. The right thing for the moment is really to protect. And I think it can be done. At some stage, yes, the interest rate will probably increase. We don't know when. Markets are convinced it will be in a long time, but it may happen before. And then we'll have to stabilize the debt. Not necessarily go back to a number like 60%, but stabilize it. That's not the priority. I think it can be done, and it will be done. But that's something that clearly is on the agenda. This, just to finish, I think when we're done with the COVID crisis, we'll have to take care of the next order of business, which is fighting global warming. And despite what people think, that's going to be costly. It's going to require a mix of debt and taxes. That's going to be the big issue. And we have to get ready for this. The recovery fund, in a way, is kind of looking forward to that. Again, I would like it to be more directed to current needs, but it is trying to help that transition. And in that sense, I think it's doing the right thing in the long run. Let me stop here. I'm happy to come back for the discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. Let me take the mask off. It was a very, very interesting point of view. Let's hope we have a vaccine soon so that we can go back to what really matters, like climate change. Now I will give the floor to Kristen Scholl, Director General for European Policy in the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy in Germany. Please, Kristen.
Obrigada. And dear Diputada Graça Carvalho, Mr. Rangel and Rio, Professor Blanchard, Professor Aguio, Professor Miranda Samanto, Mr. Hofmeister, ladies and gentlemen, muito obrigada pela possibilidade, a invitação de discutir com vocês. But now I have to turn to English. Unfortunately, that's all the Portuguese I can remember from my ancient times in Coimbra, but I still have very good memories to Portugal, of course. Well, thanks for the possibility to discuss in this very distinguished group of speakers. And I think, as was already said, this conference comes at a critical juncture regarding Europe's economic recovery and its long-term perspective. This is one in economic terms, and Professor Blanchard, you pointed this out very correctly, and but also in ecological and social respects. And of course, this is also has some influences on and impacts on our council presidency. And you said there's the pre-vaccine and the post-vaccine in a way situation, and well, we had to plan our presidency before this, and now everything in a way has to be changed, both in terms of organization as well as in terms of content. We have to reschedule many of our meetings. We have to look at other issues. We have to see what are the lessons learned out of the crisis, but also where do we go in terms of recovery. We still have to see, of course, the Green Deal, the digital transformation. So this is still on our agenda. But today we are talking about the MFF and the Next Generation EU. I think the EU finances, they are very high on the agenda. And when the heads of states and government met for the first special European summit in February this year, there was the starting point to discuss on the MFF. And at that time, we had the Commission proposal with amounting to a sum of 1.1 trillion euros for the next 7 years. But now, exactly 5 months later, after very difficult negotiations in summer, the European Council finally agreed on a package of quite a different scale, both in quantitative terms, 1.8 instead of 1.1 trillion euros for the next financial period, as well, of course, in terms of quality. And this was also already addressed. Now we have to raise the funds for the new recovery instrument, Next Generation EU. And I think this was indeed a historic compromise, a very clear sign of solidarity, and also the ability for the EU to act. And this started some way, or was paved by the German-French initiative. But Mr. Rangel, you said the European Parliament in a way was the first one to have the discussion on this very new instrument, and then it was taken up by the member states, fortunately by all the member states, and then also supported by the European Commission and the European Council. And now it's our presidency's task to lead the negotiations with the European Parliament. And of course, we are ready to do this. Still, positions differ on a range of issues. The rule of law was mentioned already in this context, but we, of course, try to reach as soon as possible a compromise in order to make that the next MFF and the Next Generation EU and its many programs are up and running with the beginning of next year, because, well, we need the money in many respects by the beginning of next year. So the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic, which unfortunately is not at all over, makes this all the more urgent. And so this requires the readiness to compromise on all sides, which means on us, the Council, as well as on the European Parliament side, to come together, as well as on the Commission side. But today, again, the European Council met, and I think they are on their way. We have the next meeting in 2 to 3 weeks' time, and hopefully we will then come to some sort of agreement. But if you now look, have again a short look back, I think the first reaction of the EU to the fallout of the crisis was this agreement on the 540 billion euro package. It includes the ESM, the EIB, and the new instrument succinctly termed the SURE, which is support to mitigate unemployment risks in an emergency. We have this in Germany also, and I think now we also have the possibility to use it on the EU level. We had some extra possibilities under the structural funds like the REACT EU or the CRE. Now the focus of the MFF and the next generation is on the medium-term recovery from the crisis and the long-term orientation of the European economy in particular. And I think Commission President von der Leyen, she said it in her State of the Union address, that the Next Generation EU is not, and I quote it, not only repair and recover for the here and now, but to shape a better way of living for the world of tomorrow. And now I would like to perhaps focus a bit on the RIF, this Recovery and Resilience Instrument, because there are still some questions how it will be financially structured and what, for example, we will either share between grants and loans. There was the final decision that we have this 672 billion euros and 360 for the loans and 312 billion euros for loans. And now we discuss this in Council. We hopefully will have the agreement by the ECOFIN ministers next week on the RRF regulation, and then we come to Parliament. Of course, we also have to look at the own resources proposal. Although this has to be, as said, agreed in unanimity and then afterwards ratified by 27 member states, which is quite ambitious to do this up to the end of the year. But if you look a bit more into the recovery instruments, so what will be the main topics, where do you have to spend the money on? I think we still have to look at the green and digital transformation, the twin transformation as it's called, and to see how in this respect we can implement structural reforms. So it is, again, to quote President von der Leyen, we will insist that the recovery plans don't just bring us out of the crisis, but also help us to propel Europe forward to the world of tomorrow. So now we have to look at the recovery plans, and I got to know that Portugal is already on the way. We do the same more or less here in Germany. We started with the negotiation of our national recovery plans, which are required to receive the funds from the RRF. This is quite a challenge because, well, you have a huge amount of money and you really have tried to start as soon as possible. Well, the first measures can already be launched as well retrospectively as to the 1st February 2020. So we decided in Germany, because we issued a quite ambitious stimulus package by June of this year, to use our national stimulus package also to use in this respect the money from the recovery fund, and so that the national stimulus package is in a way equals a bit our then national recovery plan. I think the same will be done in France by the France Relance, and I think perhaps might be a similar idea in Portugal with the Plano de Recuperação Resiliência. And of course, you also have to address, as I said, the twin transformation. There's the quota of 37% to be spent or dedicated to the green issues and about 20% for digital issues. This was agreed today by the European Council. You have to address the 7 flagships, and I think we will do this in Germany. I think our measures will cover areas such as hydrogen, renewables, electric mobility, energy efficiency, or digitization and digital communication. And of course, we also think of to have some sort of cross-border projects in this respect, in a way to also create a European added value. As I said in the beginning, we are at a critical juncture regarding the future development of our continent, something which we haven't been imagining a couple of months ago. I think we have to do this in a spirit of mutual trust and understanding and compromise to reach these results. And so we chose the motto for our presidency, Together for Europe's Recovery, and a spirit of solidarity. I think this is very well chosen and is more than valid every day. And I'm very glad that we stand together with in the trio with Portugal and Slovenia. So we try to come in as far as possible, but we are well confident then if we don't reach all the compromises or the agreements we should have reached, then we pass over to Portugal, and we are very confident that you then can take on from us. I think for the moment we really owe to come to conclude and agree on this very historic instrument, and I think we owe this to the European people and the future of our dear continent. And this regard, I just leave it for this initial remarks, looking forward to the discussion, because I think there are many interesting points to discuss. Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much. Obrigada. And good luck for the German presidency of the EU. We hope it's going well, because we will be next. So I would just like to say that Joaquim Sarmento joined us. Bem-vindo. Como está? And I will ask Michael Arguru to give his remarks, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank the organizers for extending the invitation to me. It's a great pleasure to be participating in the event. Special thanks to Maria. And of course, it is a very timely discussion. The pandemic is a major shock, a very rare phenomenon, one that happens every 100 years. And it is different compared to the previous crisis, which was back in 2008, 2009, because it affects simultaneously 3 things. It hits the economy through 3 channels. The supply channel, because the lockdown means that production was disturbed. The demand channel, because the lockdowns, as well as the feeling of insecurity of people, restrict consumption opportunities. And finally, there is the uncertainty shock, because we don't know what will go on in terms of the medical evolution of this phenomenon. So this major shock, as we know, put all economies in Europe and elsewhere in very, very big recessions. And this kind of shock is the kind of shock that may actually destabilize completely a monetary union. So it was necessary, obviously, to deal with it. Now, let me explain to you why I think that the Next Generation EU program was a very positive initiative. Countries had different ways of reacting to this shock. They started from different positions. Some countries had more fiscal space, so more ability in order to buffer the shock. Some others started from much higher debt levels. Now, in addition to these differences in fiscal space, countries have different economic structures. Some countries are able to recover from the shock faster. So the shock may be common, but the differences in economic structures may make its development asymmetric, which is basically creating further divergence among economies. And in addition to this, in Europe, we do have a very big interdependence of our economies. So although some countries could recover faster, still they would be losing because important trading partners would not be in a good shape. So this is a very major shock from which there could be no winners. In the best case scenario, there would be losers big time and losers of moderate size. And as I already said, this has the capacity of destabilizing the European Union, which we all cherish and we all want for various reasons. And something had to be done at a coordinated level, at the European level. So the first response, as Kertan said, was the liquidity package, which was agreed in April. That included the SURE program, which was very useful, the European Investment Bank Guarantee Fund, which was agreed, but at the moment it has not been activated, as well as the ESM pandemic crisis support. This was a useful, very useful framework, but as I said, it was a liquidity response, which has not been fully activated as yet, and it did not address the risks in the medium run of economic divergence. So without a major initiative, what would happen is that the European economy would continue to be supported mainly by monetary policy, and I agree there with Olivier that the European Central Bank is doing a great job in dealing with this crisis, but monetary policy on its own cannot respond to a shock of such dimensions. And if you overdo it, if you do monetary overkill, then you go into other risks, like financial stability risks, or even the risk of going back to the 1970s. I know that this sounds quite remote at this stage when we have deflation, but we know very well that if you overflow the economic system with liquidity, at some stage you may have inflation going upwards. So that is why I think that the Next Generation EU program was a very good response, because it has this very smart combination of supporting economic activity in the short run by means of a very substantial fiscal intervention in the size of 750 billion euros, which is a very substantial injection of money, a very substantial fiscal effort. But it is designed to offer this support to economic activity through initiatives which improve the long-term productive capacity of the European economy. So to respond to Paolo's very correct remark, basically it is designed not to provide money only for the short run, but the money to be invested, the money to be spent to have a beneficial long-term legacy. So we think in Greece that the Next Generation EU program was a very major successful initiative. We believe that it is anchored in sound economics and international experience from previous extreme once-in-many-generation crisis episodes. It is a positive-sum game. Naturally, this is an exercise of very, very welcome and appreciated solidarity for countries that were in more difficult starting positions, such as my country. At the same time, it is an initiative which also preserves the well-meant interests of other countries which had bigger fiscal space. So this is well-meant common economic interest. Because if some lose, everybody is going to lose in a crisis of this dimension. We don't think that the size of the Next Generation EU program is disproportionate to the size of the challenge. It is a very substantial initiative, but it is not an exaggerated initiative. If you see other major jurisdictions like the United States or Japan, they have similar or even bigger fiscal expansions. And very importantly, I have already mentioned this, it sets the basis for a suitable fine-tuned policy mix among fiscal, monetary, and structural policies. So in our view, this is a very good platform for economic recovery. Just a couple of caveats here. These very good characteristics, in our view, should not be compromised by suboptimal execution of the plan. So we should make sure that all the safeguards are in place, but we should not have extra heavy administration procedures or delays in the execution, because then we will not have the front loading of economic activity that's necessary in order to overcome the crisis quickly. Having said the above, let me turn a little bit to the Greek situation. Well, Greece, as you know, was very unlucky because at the time that we were recovering from a major 10-year-long crisis, this thing happened. The Greek economy is perhaps more vulnerable to a crisis like this pandemic because pandemics affect the services sector, the face-to-face economic activity. as you know, we rely quite a lot on tourism. We also have a very major shipping industry, and with world trade declining, this is also against our interest, so to say. Having said that, I have to tell you that so far, the outlook has not deteriorated as much as it was initially forecasted. So initially, it was forecasted that in 2020, Greece will be the country with the highest recession in Europe. Of course, 2020 has not ended yet, so we should not count our chickens before they hatch. But in the first half of 2020, our economy contracted by minus 7.9% on an annual basis, which is, of course, a very big recession. But that is better than the EMU average, which was minus 9%. In addition, we have reasonably good, under the circumstances, forward-looking indicators. So if you examine macroeconomic variables which are available at higher frequency, such as, for example, electronic transactions, demand for electricity, industrial production, mobility statistics, etc., all these point towards an overall 2020 growth rate, which is going to be more or less, we hope, in line with the European average. Of course, we are going to wait for the figures of Q3, where there is a lot of economic activity concentrated in Greece due to the tourist activity. So we do acknowledge, of course, the existence of significant downside risks. And then the question is how we go forward from here. Basically, we have an economic plan, which is addressing the current phase, which I would call it as the new normal phase. It is what Olivia alluded before to. It is the period before an effective vaccine or an effective treatment of the disease is found. So it is a period during which economies are going to continue to operate under crisis mode, but it is not the lockdown period that we had last spring. So during this period, our plan is to continue supporting the supply side of the economy through the provision of liquidity, as well as supporting the labor market. But gradually, we aim to move from emergency measures to more targeted measures and measures which have a more beneficial long-term effect. So recently, we announced the reduction in labor tax wage, and also we announced initiatives in order to increase new vacancies as well as incentivize investment in green and digital. So we are going, hopefully, to contain any losses of economic activity until the medical end game is reached. And from then onwards, what we want to do, and we want to do this even before we reach this third stage, is we want to accelerate the economic recovery for the post-pandemic period. And that, of course, has a very big link with the RRF, with the Next Generation EU program, because it is there where we aim to combine well investment projects with reforms. We fully endorse the architecture of the RRF. I think that this is important. We should not see the RRF as a collection of projects in which we should simply channel money. We should combine it with reforms, which are necessary anyway, in order for this money to be used effectively. We endorse in Greece the green agenda and the digital transformation agenda. Indeed, we already had advanced plans for these two sectors. In Greece, we had the so-called Digital Bible, which the government wanted to implement. And also we had the National Energy and Environment Plan with commitments including the phasing out of lignite in electricity production, etc. So we are very comfortable with the targets that have been set in the RRF for 37% climate-related expenditure and 20% digital expenditure. We believe that digitization is very important for improving productivity. Then one big item on our agenda when it comes to our own RRF envelope is covering the large investment gap that was created in Greece during the 10 years of the previous crisis, where we lost approximately 100 billion worth of investment. That is approximately more or less half of the investment that would otherwise happen in Greece. This is the estimate that Greece has had 50% reduction in the investment volume that it would have without the previous crisis. So we want to cover that. And that applies also to private investment as well as to public investment. So what we want to do is to use the RRF in order to attract investment of high value added, which will contribute to the increase in the competitiveness of the Greek economy, to the creation of economies of scale for Greek firms, also to have investment which will increase the degree of openness of the Greek economy. And very significantly, one thing that we have learned from this crisis is that sectoral crisis can become national crisis. In other words, there should be a healthy diversification of economic activity. So we should not rely only on our tourism or our very successful shipping industry, which they are fantastic and which we greatly appreciate. And we do not want by any means to reduce their dynamism. They are doing a great job and we want them to continue this great job. What I'm saying is that we should also give the opportunity to other kinds of economic activity like the industrial sector to develop so that we do not rely too much on certain sectors, which if they are hit, they create big national economic crisis. And the last thing that we want to do, but I'm saying this last, but it's by no means last in our list of priorities, is that we want to use the funds provided by the RRF in order to give a boost, A, to the human capital of our country, which is very important for long-term growth. So here I'm speaking about upskilling and reskilling of the labor force, plus, of course, the education system, which is a major creator of human capital. And also, it is very important for us to use the RRF funds in order to create a stronger safety net and higher protection for vulnerable groups. It is true that during the years of the crisis, certain social cohesion elements of our state took a big hit. For example, the health sector, or the kind of safety net we provide for vulnerable groups. So this is also a major area of priority for us. The plan is, and I'm coming to the end of my intervention, to have a first draft in autumn, so more or less within the next 4 to 6 weeks. We will then go to the European Commission. We are going to cooperate very productively and constructively with our European partners. And we hope that this opportunity will be something which we will look back at in the future and we will say, although the pandemic was a very major crisis and people went through hard times, it also triggered economic transformation, which our country in Greece, but also elsewhere in Europe, were in need of. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Argyro. I guess we have a lot to think about. We have this Next Generation EU program. When will the money come and how to spend it well? I guess it's the fundamental question. We have some minutes for questions. I don't know if anybody in the room, we have a small audience, as great and as big as the pandemic allows us to have in the room. I don't know if anybody has... por favor.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much. Sorry for my little delay. Just to make clear, I have arrived when Professor Blanchard was beginning his presentation. Thank you very much. I'll make the final remarks. But I think the main question is, besides how long is going to take to recover the economy to the pre-levels of 2019, is if a slow recovery, as we now all expect, unfortunately, could or will lead to a financial crisis, especially in the banking sector in Europe, and also for how long can the European Central Bank maintain its monetary policy, the ability to keep interest rates close to zero or in some cases even negative, and the capacity to continue with the public sector purchase program that has been a huge help to some countries, and I'm thinking not just in Portugal, but also in Portugal, to be able to finance public debt in the markets with interest rates again, close to zero or even negative? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will have a question. Excuse me. I have a question. I will ask Kirsten, but our speakers can answer as well. How long can we delay this program and this money? Or to be more direct, when will it be too late to give this money to the countries? Yeah, of course. And I will, Matthias, please.
Yeah, good afternoon to you all. I have a short question. We know that we are facing a challenging time, and we know this European plan gives us a great amount of money to spend. My question is simple. Where do we need to spend? Do we have a new option to spend in the public spending? We know in the past that was a wrong option in Portugal. Where do we can spend, and where do we can add value to our economy, not only in Portugal, but in the European Union, to make a difference? Because we know we are facing a challenging time, and this may not be another opportunity to have this plan and to have these conditions to finance this plan. As Joaquim already told you, these interest rates are too low. We shouldn't face these contexts any more in the near future. And for that reason, we should know and we should decide where do we want to spend this money, and where do you want to add the value to the European economy and to make the difference facing other major economies in the world.
Okay, thank you very much. So maybe I will ask our three guests to answer one at each time. Who wants to start? Maybe we can follow the same order. So Olivier, then Kirsten, then Michael. Okay, Olivier, will you please start?
Thank you. How long is it going to take for the recovery? Again, I mean, the question, the way I think about it is how long will the pre-vaccine phase be? Once the vaccine is there, a lot of the measures can basically be turned off. But it could be, if it's, another 9 months, there is no question that the states can basically spend the money. We're talking about a few percent of GDP. This would increase the debt levels, but not enormously. If it lasts longer, so in the worst scenario, unlikely but possible scenario, then there's going to be an issue. And there, somebody's going to accumulate debt. The businesses which are not selling will have to accumulate debt unless they basically get grants from the government, in which case the governments will increase their debt. And so the question is going to be, well, where should the debt kind of be? And my sense is that we are lucky that we're in an environment in which public debt can increase a bit more. And so my impression is basically the government should be ready to spend whatever it takes until basically the vaccine is there. It's better to do that. If you don't do this, then some firms will be in trouble. And if firms are in trouble, the financial institutions might be in trouble. At this stage, they can take a hit. They have taken the hit so far quite well, but there's probably a limit to what they can take. In the end, if somebody is going to take the hit, I think it has to be the state. It is in the best position to do it, and it's not incredibly costly for the moment. I'll just take one of the other questions, which is when will it be too late? And here, let me say what I think about the recovery fund. It's great news, no question, and I'm very thankful to those people who negotiated it, and I hope it goes through. And it indicates a change of attitude vis-a-vis the European Union. I think it's great stuff. But it seems to me it's very much a post-vaccine plan, realistically, and not a pre-vaccine one. If you think about the various dimensions in which help might be needed now, it's not going to do great. I mean, if you think, for example, of fiscal space, then the money should go to 2 or 3 countries which don't have a whole lot of fiscal space. These countries are going to get a bit more, but not to the extent that an ESM program would actually do. For example, looking at micro, I think that it cannot be aimed at that. If you think about the timing, we discussed it, and it was mentioned by Kirsten and Michael. It's going to be very hard to spend the money right in the next 9 months, and the risk. I mean, I see it in France with subsidies for insulation. It's part of the French plan. It's about 30% is also green stuff. The firms on the supply side just have no clue of how to increase the supply, and it's going to be largely wasted. So my sense is it makes a lot of sense, but the way to spend the money is going to be slow, and it's going to come too late for the current COVID crisis. It's going to do good stuff, but not. So it seems to me, and the last thing is, again, what is the need in the next 9 months? It is to basically help the workers who have lost their jobs in restaurants and give money to restaurants so that they can cover fixed costs. That's, if you're going to spend on green stuff, that's not going to be useful. There's an issue of composition, which is such that the recovery fund, as I understand it, cannot really help at that margin. So again, it's a great plan, but not quite what's needed for the next 9 months. And I worry a bit about that, but on that, I'll take it any day. I give the floor to Kirsten.
Thank you, Olivier, and no, thank you for the interesting discussion. And yes, well, when it's too late, and what is the terms of timing and where to spend? I think in terms of timing, as you said, Olivier, I think we now have to focus on really getting the agreement on the whole package, which is still quite ambitious. We started with our proposals from the July agreement from the European Council immediately to propose the relevant regulations, and now we have to negotiate with the member states, with the European Parliament and the Commission, as I said before. And I do hope that we reach the consensus by the end of the year. And of course, again, we have the tricky issue of the ratification of the own resources decision. But of course, well, every member state is right now starting to present its recovery plans, and we discussed with the Commission, and it's quite interesting. We got this very extensive set of guidelines from the EU Commission. They're very detailed on the one side, and on the other side, we're just starting and try to see what will we have in our national recovery plans. And they're a bit more open and less detailed, as, for example, the Commission would like to have it. And then we have to discuss with the Commission. We have to set also some sort of milestones and indicators, and everything has to be approved by next April. So this is the timeline we have to face. But then we have to see well how to spend the money, in which directions. And if I look at our German stimulus program, we have this roundabout 130 billion euro, and we have 3 parts in it. And the first one is really the very immediate crisis reaction, was about 50 billion euros just for the very compensation and to see what is needed by the companies. We had the second part for example, for the reduction of the VAT. It's also a possibility. And then the third part, and I think this is the one which then can also be addressed by the RRF, is to invest into future-oriented programs, like, as I said in the beginning, hydrogen, battery cell production, and energy efficiency, electronic mobility. But of course, this is not really starting from now, but this has a longer-term perspective. If you, for example, look at this idea on the European level for the IPCEI, these important projects for common European interest, where several companies from several member states come together, and we have this IPCEI on battery cell production, on semiconductors. For the semiconductors, it took us 3 years really to get the agreement by the European Commission, and now we have these other very, I think, future-oriented good projects, like, for example, for hydrogen. Everybody is talking about hydrogen, yes, I think this is important if you look at the Green Deal and to see, well, how can we in a way see that the Green Deal is also feasible for the companies. Hydrogen is important, but you really have to start by now. So this is rather than for the, as you said, only for the post-vaccine period. You have to start to deal by now. You have to agree now and to discuss it with the Commission. But the perspective, I think, is in a way in a long-term one. So this is, I think, what we at least still discuss here in Germany, and I think the discussions they are everywhere. And perhaps a last remark: you always also have to look at the European Commission in terms of state aid. You have this the discussion with the temporary framework. Everything has to be also agreed by the European Commission. In this respect, I think Commissioner Vestager, she did a great job, but we still have to see, well, what is the right way in this direction. So then I pass now to Michael.
Thank you very much. Yes, a very interesting set of questions, and already a lot of very valid comments offered by Olivier and Kirsten. Regarding the ECB monetary policy, how long can the ECB continue to have this accommodating approach? Of course, the ECB is fully independent, and it is for the ECB to decide. As an academic economist, I will risk a personal prediction here. And I would say that I would expect the ECB to continue on the path that it is now for the foreseeable future. Markets seem to provide a vote of confidence in the monetary policy of the ECB, as well as to the policy reaction within the EU. Market bond yields for national government bonds are very low. And also the euro in recent months has gained value versus the dollar and other currencies. In fact, it has gained value to an extent that we may consider it a little bit problematic. But at any rate, there seems to be a vote of confidence on behalf of the markets on the policy mix which has now been formulated. So I would expect that the ECB is not going to take any action which might undermine the prospects of recovery. When we will have the money available, when is the option to spend it? Yes, it is a very valid point. I think that that's why I made the comment during my initial intervention that we should not put extra administrative burden and make the disbursement of money very cumbersome, because then we will cancel out part of the advantages of the Next Generation program. This is not to say, of course, that we shouldn't have the right safeguards or the right governance in place. Where the money is going to be spent? Well, of course, different countries have different challenges. So Kirsten referred to certain priorities, and basically they are priorities which also underline and they promote the strategic independence of Europe when it comes to certain vital markets. And I think that this is a very good agenda. It is not, of course, an endorsement of protectionism. Europe had always thrived on open trade, and it will continue to do so. The European economies are open economies, they export a lot, and we want to have free trade globally. Having said that, we need to have some element of strategic independence when it comes to critical sectors. So I think that the agenda that Kirsten outlined there is very valid, but in other countries, in certain countries, this will be more relevant than in others. So countries should have enough flexibility to formulate their national recovery plans on the basis of the challenges that they face. And the last comment, which hopefully it will not be perceived as controversial, is the following. There has been a lot of very good progress and response to this crisis, much faster than in the previous crisis. Nevertheless, in every incidence of crisis, when you compare the way things are done in Europe, de jure versus, say, the United States, you always realize that Europe operates under certain limitations which emerge from the fact that we are an incomplete monetary union. Now we are sovereign states, and that is why we have no common fiscal policy. But when it comes to periods of acute crisis, this puts a limitation. And one of the things that I would like very much the Next Generation EU to be successful is not simply because we need it to be successful right now. It is also important in order to gather support for future fiscal coordination on a more permanent basis, because when you have a large economy such as the European one, and you have large shocks like the present one, and unavoidably in the future there will be incidences of shocks, having a more complete institutional infrastructure, including, for example, a common fiscal tool, is very helpful. But this is not for the time being, and I suppose that whether we will go to that direction is going to rely a lot on how we deal with this very significant fiscal coordination effort.
Can I come in and add something to what Michael just said, which is, I think the recovery fund is a great thing, but if it fails, it will basically be a catastrophe. And the way it could fail is if it is seen as having financed projects which didn't make much sense in various countries because the money was available. So again, let's hope it works, but it's a big bet. And there's a trade-off between a heavy machinery, as you said, which would basically prevent money to be spent, and letting governments choose their pet projects and use the funds to finance them. So I think the challenge is there and the risk is there, but again, it surely is worth doing.
Thank you very much. I guess we have a question in the room, and then Professor Maria da Graça Carvalho also wants to ask a question. I will start by the room, please.
Good afternoon. I have a question exactly about what Professor Blanchard was talking about right now, so maybe it's especially for him, but of course for everyone. I read the paper about the crisis in Portugal in 2011 and in all of Europe, but especially in the PIGS country. And it said that with austerity, worker productivity went up. So the GDP went down, but unemployment went up way more than the GDP came down. So this means that there was such a misallocation of resources in the years before, in the boom that came before, that the crisis actually, unlike what always happens, had a counter-cyclical worker productivity effect. So what I ask is, how can we avoid that this happens again? Because we have so much money, but I think people in Portugal are starting to think that it's not about having money anymore. It's about using it well, spending it well, allocating the resources, the productive factors in a way that corresponds to what people are searching for in terms of consumption. And so my question is, specifically in comparison to what was done before, what do we have to do different? What criteria do we apply to make sure that this is not another misallocation of resources and productive factors?
Well, we're running out of time. So the last question from Professor Maria da Graça Carvalho, please.
Thank you very much. And I take this opportunity also to thank again the speakers, because in the beginning when I thank, some were still trying to connect. I apologize for that. We had some technical problems in the beginning, but I really thank all of you. I know that you are all very busy agenda with a lot of responsibility, that you took time to share your knowledge and your deep experience on these matters with us. My question, Professor Blanchard has already touched a little bit, but there is a discussion in Portugal about the right balance between what is going to be invested in large infrastructures, in projects of large infrastructures like airports, and also in the public services, so in the state, and what is going to be invested directly in the economy, in companies, on people, like training and reconverting people. So if you could comment on that. We have a long tradition in Portugal to use regional funds and the previous funds in large infrastructures, some of them that after are not so used. So we should now make it different, but I would like to have your comments on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I guess we can follow the same order. So Olivier, Kirsten, Michael, please.
I'll just make one remark, which is, in a standard recession, you get bankruptcies, and this kind of weeds out the really inefficient firms. And so there's some positive aspect to recessions. They are bad, but at least they do that. I think this one is quite different because if you look at who is going to go bankrupt, it is really sectors which have done nothing wrong. And so in this case, I think that the productivity effects might be quite different. You basically do not want to let too many bankruptcies because they don't reflect fundamentals. They reflect an accident, which presumably will go away. So the relation between productivity and activity may be quite different this time from what it was in the previous recessions. Let me stop here.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think also two interesting questions also on the balance and to look at the large infrastructure projects. We have similar discussions also in Germany, and of course we try also to in a way to support some of these projects in former times also under structural funds, but then to look also in terms of our stimulus package. But again, I think if you have to look at the RRF, and Olivier, as you said, I think it's a big challenge really that it doesn't fail in terms of content, in terms of ambition. And if I look, for example, at the automotive industry, of course, the automotive industry is definitely hit also by the crisis, but well, is it also in a way, is this the right industry to really focus under the RRF? Some of them say yes, others say no. So I don't want to give here my opinion on this because, well, this is still under discussion. But of course, this is, I think, one example. And in the same, I think, is then for the infrastructure projects. I think one issue I forgot in my previous remarks, I think what is also very much on the agenda for us is the digital agenda. And you have to look at investments in AI and quantum technology and what we call the so-called Gaia X, European data infrastructure. So I think this is some of the projects we really should invest. This is something which has some extra focus. This is innovative in a way, and if I think, but this is rather a personal perception, should be more successful if the RRF is concentrated and focused on these projects. Of course, you also have to look at the other ones, but I think should be more future oriented in a way. Thank you. Pass to Michael.
Thank you so much. Very briefly, yes, I fully understand what you are saying when you comment about the productivity developments that were observed in the previous crisis. I think that to a large extent in economies like Portugal, and perhaps even more so in Greece, that was the result of having a very enlarged non-traded sector. I mean, in the period 2000 to 2010, many countries in certain European countries, definitely Greece was one, probably Portugal was another, was one where there was an oversized expansion of the non-traded sector. The non-traded sector, because it is less exposed to international competition, it's by definition, let's say, less productive in the sense of value added, because there is less competition. Then you and we had the crisis, and a lot of those non-productive firms went out of the market. So basically, I think that now, and I agree with Olivier, you are not going to observe the same productivity developments that you observed back in 2010, 2012, because most of the firms that you have now there are the survivors of the previous crisis. So these guys are the guys who are very productive. So I don't think that this time around you are going to observe the same stylized facts. And that is why it is important, and it is worth the expense, to preserve the supply side, because this is, if you like, the healthy, the sustainable supply side. Naturally, there is going to be losses, but the bulk of the firms who have survived in Portugal and Greece the previous crisis are the seasoned veterans of a very big crisis. Therefore, they are good companies, and we should try to preserve them. With regards to the quality of projects which have been financed in the past, again, I understand what you mean. We have similar experience here in Greece. So obviously we should learn from our previous experiences, and this time around get it even better, get it right. And this is going to be my last remark, because I make it often here with my colleagues in Greece. We should not forget that the amount of money that we are going to receive in the context of the RRF is very substantial, but it is limited, it is finite. At the end of the day, it is less than the amount of money we have received in previous years through cohesion funds. Therefore, we must definitely make sure that we accompany smart investments and productive investments with the reforms which will allow our economies to continue living in the modern world. If we don't do the right reforms, then the money is not going to be leading to sustainable growth. And when I'm speaking about reforms here, I'm not speaking about cutting pensions or cutting public sector wages. What I'm trying to say here is that we should be looking at reforms which increase productivity, which are increasing human capital, and which are increasing the infrastructure of the country. And this is something which takes a lot of communication effort. I think that governments should communicate this very well to their citizens. Also, I believe that governments should have ownership of this program so that they take society with them. And finally, the implementation of reforms has to be technically well organized, that is to say, structured and sequenced in the proper way.
Thank you. Thank you all of you for the presentations and for your answers. We could be here all day discussing these issues, but we have to go to our closing remarks. And I will give the floor to Joaquim Sarmento, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon again. My first word goes to Graça Carvalho and Will Offersmeier to congratulate both Instituto Francisco Sá Carneiro and Konrad Adenauer Foundation for the organization of this excellent conference with fantastic speakers from which we have learned so much during this afternoon. Also a kind word for my friend Matthias for all his work in the organization of this event and for receiving us in Almada. And also thank you to Helena Steiro, our moderator. Thank you very much, all of you, for this invitation. I would also like to salute my dear friend Paulo Cangel and our three distinguished guests, Christian Skoll, Michael Ayoro, and Oliver Blanchard. In the case of Professor Blanchard, you will excuse me, but as an academic and economist, I have to say that much from what I have learned in the past 25 years since I entered university to graduate in economics, I've learned from Professor Blanchard's work, his manuals, his papers, and his articles and interventions. It is an honor for me to speak after such distinguished panel of discussants. The pandemics of the coronavirus had struck us all in February and March, leading most governments around the world to take actions that were unthinkable just a few months ago, mainly the great lockdown, as the IMF has coined this period that we have been living. The pandemics naturally lead to a severe economic and social crisis that all countries are facing. The challenges ahead are enormous. No manual of economics taught us how to stop and almost completely shut down all the economies and how to reopen them. Again, Professor Blanchard mentioned the mechanical rebound that should not convince us of a fast recovery. After the enormous challenge that the 2008 financial crisis was, not just 10 years after, we face a new and even more destructive crisis, but also, as mentioned by Michael Aguilar, a very different crisis. Uncertainty is the key driver at this moment, and we still have to quell the virus and the pandemics. The fact that no one can predict when we are going to have a vaccine and when we are going to be able to recover our life to the possible normality of 2019 leads to us uncertainty about any economic forecast. In fact, Professor Blanchard referred that return to normal and the need for protection of the most affected and vulnerable economic sector is the first priority for the next 9 months. Also, public finances will continue to be a restriction, although flexibility and a little bit more depth is needed. But as mentioned by Michael Aguilar, countries such as Greece or Portugal, I may add, need to diversify their economy. Therefore, Europe has responded with a firm package of financial support for the EU members, the next generation EU. Each country is now working on the national recovery plans, and we expect governments to deliver such plans in a draft version by 15th of October, which is less than 2 weeks from now. Until April of 2021, if European Parliament and national, and in some cases regional parliaments, approve this program, it is expected that the European Commission negotiates and approves each national plan so that EU funds can arrive at each country by summer, fall of 2021. As mentioned by Kristen Skoll, it is less than previously agreed and expected, but is a huge step. But there are also still issues in the discussion. Yet, there are 4 issues that I consider fundamental and I would like to stress in this intervention. The first is that the virus and the subsequent economic crisis should not deviate our attention from the fact that Eurozone countries faced already a slowdown in GDP growth in 2019. But more importantly, we cannot ignore the economic problems and the lack of competitiveness of most of the Eurozone member states. In particular, in the Portuguese case, the last 2 decades have been a disappointment, not to put too many strong words on it, in terms of GDP real growth. From 2000 to 2019, the accumulated, and I repeat, the accumulated GDP real growth was 10%, representing an annual average real growth of 0.5. 2 decades of stagnation in the economy represents that the income and salaries have also stagnated. Again, accumulated GDP per capita real growth was around 8% in the past 20 years. And the causes for such stagnation and lack of competitiveness in the Portuguese economy are well known. Transaction costs, bureaucracy and red tape, a complex and unstable tax system with a high level of tax burden, a slow and ineffective justice system, a rigid and dual labor market, the lack of skilled human capital in some sectors, and the low link between R&D at universities, where actually Portugal scores now very well, and firms, among other factors. This leads to my second issue. The European Commission has established that the recovery funds will only be dispersed if national governments take the necessary reforms to address the problems of competitiveness of their economies by following the recommendations of the European semester. This, as mentioned by Kristen Skoll, it will be a huge challenge for all countries, but also to the European Union institutions. I strongly hope and urge that this surveillance mechanism will be able to be effective, and that in fact these funds and this crisis is an opportunity to reform our economies, strengthen our economic growth as we take advantage of decarbonization and digitalization of our economies. Otherwise, and that's my further remark, these funds, and not just the EU recovery plan, but also the next funding program for 2020-2030, will not serve to increase the capacity and resilience of the economy. And they will not address the main drivers of each country's economic competitiveness. I have no doubts that Portugal changed dramatically over the last 35 years, since in 1986, and I was 7 years old at that time, we joined the European Union, at the time the European Economic Community. The transformations on the economy, on the social, education, welfare, health, culture, and the substantial reduction of the infrastructure gap were extraordinary and a history of success. Yet, as I mentioned at the beginning of my intervention, the funds may have transformed the country, but they did not leverage our economic growth in the last 2 decades. In fact, from an economic perspective, they created 2 countries. One, with innovation in international firms, producing transactable, high-quality goods and services for all over the world, and other with a large non-transactable market, low competition and innovation, fixed rents, and low salaries. Finally, my fourth and last remark is that funds not only need to be used to transform the economic capacity and must be aligned with structural reforms, but they also need a robust public service. The extraordinary amount of resources that needed to be committed in the next 3 years is of an unprecedented level. Between the EU recovery program, 15 billion euros to be committed in projects and programs in 3 years, with 10 billion euros still to be executed from the previous European program, Portugal 2020, and the beginning of the new European program, the Portugal 2030, there, between 2021 and 2024, there will be an average of 8 to 10 billion euros a year, which amounts to 4 to 5% of the Portuguese GDP. With the Portuguese public administration lacking human resource and expertise, my concern is that funds will be diverted again for low-value projects without a proper cost-benefit analysis, and worse, to forms of diverting money that could represent waste or, in some cases, even worse, corruption. In sum, this is an extraordinary opportunity if we follow three main vectors: structural reforms, using funds to recover and transform the economy and not just to respond to needs, and also be capable of creating a strong, very efficient and flexible governance and management of all these funds. As I often mention, when we throw money into problems, one of the things tends to disappear, but usually is not the problem. Thank you again for your time and congratulations on this magnificent event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, not throwing money to problems and then waiting for them to disappear. Nuno Matias, please. What is yours?
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you again to our guests for this important event. If you don't mind, I will address these final remarks in our mother language because I need to give some information to our audience and therefore I will speak in Portuguese. Em primeiro lugar, também complementar os agradecimentos com a presença do nosso amigo e companheiro Dr. Joaquim Sarmento, o principal responsável do nosso Conselho Estratégico Nacional, bem como a Helena, que fez aqui o papel brilhante num cenário e num evento, objetivamente, num tempo único, em que temos que lidar com os nossos convidados e a audiência à distância, fez um papel desafiante, mas extraordinariamente bem conseguido. Um cumprimento a todos aqueles que nos seguem à distância e àqueles poucos, face às regras, que podem estar aqui connosco presencialmente, para dar-vos também as boas-vindas à Almada e um agradecimento também a todos aqueles que tornaram possível esta conferência internacional, que vem no seguimento da estratégia delineada pela nossa Presidente, Maria da Graça Carvalho, que também aproveito para cumprimentar, bem como aos vice-presidentes aqui presentes, quer a Alina Lopes, quer ao João Montenegro, também secretário-geral adjunto do partido, porque o Instituto Sá Carneiro está a procurar marcar a diferença na forma como pensa, na forma como cria estratégia e na forma como cria eventos diferenciadores que debatam de forma estratégica o presente e o futuro. Aquilo que gostaria de deixar é, em primeiro lugar, algumas informações. No próximo dia 12 de outubro vamos ter também um grande evento com a presença do Dr. Durão Barroso sobre o tema, eu não quero enganar-me e portanto vou ler, Portugal e a Europa face ao mundo e aos desafios da pandemia. Bem como aquilo que já tem acontecido e o Instituto Sá Carneiro em conjunto com a Juventude Social Democrata, mas também com o PPE e com o Grupo de Deputados Europeus, a organização quer da Universidade de Verão, quer da Universidade da Europa, exatamente na senda daquilo que é também um plano de formação autárquico que o Instituto vai procurar desenvolver num ano especial e num ano onde nos queremos afirmar como o partido que mais representa as pessoas e mais defende a nossa terra. E em último lugar, dar nota que também no decurso do mês de novembro o Instituto irá organizar uma conferência sobre algo que todos nós percebemos que, como há pouco se falava, é importante para acrescentar valor, que são as novas tecnologias ao serviço do futuro e de que forma é que essas novas tecnologias, um processo de inovação e desenvolvimento, podem acrescentar o tal valor que nos diferencia e nos pode tornar diferentes e mais competitivos no espectro, quer europeu, quer mundial. E dar também nota de que este evento, no seguimento de outros, tem cumprido o objetivo da nossa Presidente e do Conselho de Administração, na exata medida em que estamos a procurar afirmar o Instituto Francisco Sá Carneiro como o verdadeiro espaço de reflexão estratégica do país não só da social-democracia, mas do país, para chamar a cidadania para debater o presente que temos e o futuro que queremos construir. É essa a missão que Francisco Sá Carneiro, desde o início, nos deixou. Essa é a missão que, quer no Partido Social Democrata, quer no Instituto Sá Carneiro, temos procurado continuar, e com estes e outros eventos, foi com gosto que, neste caso em Almada, também demonstramos que continuamos a fazer a diferença, mesmo num tempo desafiante, onde infelizmente não podemos estar sempre todos juntos, mas mesmo à distância estamos unidos num propósito, que é marcar a diferença e construir o futuro.
Muito obrigada. E acho que não... Voltei para português também. Obrigada a todos. E não podemos encerrar sem as closing remarks, umas breves palavras do Presidente do PSD, Rui Rio, julgo que estão prontas para nós ouvirmos e para fechar esta conferência.
Eu queria, em primeiro lugar, elogiar esta iniciativa do Instituto Sá Carneiro, na pessoa da professora Graça Carvalho e toda a sua direção, nova direção, que está a entrar agora em funções. Elogiar esta iniciativa, mas também dizer que acredito que vai fazer um bom mandato em duas vertentes, uma esta, de debate e de abertura do diálogo, mas também na outra que é absolutamente vital do ponto de vista estratégico, não para o partido, mas, em minha opinião, para os partidos, que é a questão da formação política. Eu acho que é uma lacuna que nós temos há muitos anos. Se nós tivéssemos tido programas de formação política intensiva, digamos assim, nos últimos 20 ou 20 e tal anos, nós hoje tínhamos quadros, não digo políticos, mas quadros partidários, seguramente, não só com mais valor, como, acima de tudo, com uma postura diferente perante aquilo que é a atividade partidária. E, portanto, tenho aqui uma tarefa estrategicamente muito relevante que seguramente irá cumprir com sucesso. O sucesso, naturalmente, dentro dos meios disponíveis, como é lógico. No Portugal pós-Covid, acho que se deve sublinhar aqui um aspecto, em minha opinião, muito relevante. Há 4 meses atrás, 5 meses atrás, diríamos todos, bom, perante esta pandemia, não é uma guerra, mas é um abalo brutal no mundo e em particular da Europa, se a Europa estiver capaz de responder, a Europa abre novos horizontes para o seu futuro. Se a Europa não conseguir uma resposta, a Europa fecha-se e eu penso que a breve estaria a braços com seríssimos problemas e cada Estado-membro também com seríssimos problemas dentro de si próprios, com os extremos anti-europeus a crescer. Portanto, aquilo que nós vemos é que a Europa foi capaz de dar essa resposta. A Europa tem a resposta. Eles podem gostar mais de uma maneira, mais de outra, mas não há duas dúvidas neste momento que, com longas reuniões e longas negociações, mas no fim acabou por se chegar a uma solução consensual em que todos podemos dizer que a Europa respondeu bem. Ou seja, cada um de nós, se não estivesse na Europa, de nós, Estados-membros, se não estivéssemos na Europa, estávamos nesta altura numa situação muitíssimo mais difícil. Portanto, acho que também devemos sublinhar logo à partida este aspecto, porque ele é decisivo para o nosso futuro coletivo, coletivo Portugal e coletivo Europa como um todo. Quem vai pagar este dinheiro todo que a Europa vai pôr à disposição? Porque às vezes nós vemos muito dinheiro e ficamos com a ideia, bom, apareceu o dinheiro, pois apareceu, mas alguém vai pagar. Quem vai pagar são fundamentalmente as próximas gerações. A próxima geração é que vai pagar. Então nós temos de ter um compromisso. E esse compromisso que nós temos, e um que está mesmo, na minha ótica, está mesmo definido à escala europeia, está bem, que é a questão das alterações climáticas. É aquilo que nós hoje temos de combater e fazer pela geração que vai pagar, que nós agora estamos a usar. E penso que em termos de acordo, se assim se pode dizer, entre gerações, este aspecto é fundamental. Como eles vão pagar, aqueles que são mais novos, vêm atrás de nós temos de construir aquilo que eles vão herdar. E, portanto, combate às alterações climáticas, acho que é fundamental, e está definido como principal objetivo até de todo este dinheiro, todos estes montantes postos à disposição da Europa. O segundo tem a ver com o payback, com aquilo que nós vamos conseguir da aplicação do dinheiro. Esse payback em finanças é dinheiro, aqui não é dinheiro, é desenvolvimento e condições para o desenvolvimento. Para todos os países membros, começar pelo nosso, temos de ter consciência que devemos aplicar bem o dinheiro em nosso benefício, nosso, que estamos aqui todos hoje neste mundo, mas benefício também, e isso é muito importante, daqueles que hoje são mais novos, mas que depois vão ter de pagar aquilo que nós agora estamos a gastar, a investir. E, portanto, temos de ter essa consciência, que eu acho que é absolutamente fundamental, e que, por exemplo, Portugal não teve, ao longo dos anos, não tem tido exatamente essa consciência, quando atinge dívidas externas e particularmente uma dívida pública muito elevada, muitas vezes não teve a consciência que se eu gasto agora e me endivido, alguém no futuro vai ter de pagar. E se me gasto mal e me endivido mal, quem vier depois não tem os recursos necessários para pagar, que deveriam ser gerados pelo próprio investimento. Dentro disso, eu diria que o nosso principal objetivo tem de ser as empresas. São as empresas, em primeiro lugar, digamos assim, constroem uma economia, que nos dão os empregos, melhores ou piores, e nós queremos melhores, que nos pagam os salários, melhores ou piores, e nós queremos melhores. Portugal tem, naturalmente, um salário médio muito baixo hoje e um salário médio já muito encostado ao salário mínimo, portanto, do ponto de vista dos salários nós não estamos bem, e, portanto, nós temos de aproveitar esse dinheiro para construir uma economia mais robusta, melhores empregos, melhores salários. Pois bem, não só as empresas, mas acima de tudo as empresas são aquelas que, enfim, têm de fazer isso e, portanto, todo este dinheiro deve apostar na competitividade da economia nacional, que é o mesmo que dizer, na competitividade das empresas e de cada uma das empresas. E é por isso que eu colocaria esse objetivo em primeiro lugar. Isto, no entanto, e particularmente empresas que exportam, empresas que querem investir, fundamentalmente, de produção de bens transacionáveis, porque nós temos de reforçar o peso das exportações no produto, porque assim, e essa competitividade não à custa de salários baixos, mas à custa de know-how, para podermos pagar os salários mais elevados. É um momento bom. Todos os momentos maus não são 100% maus. Se nós conseguirmos e tivermos criatividade, temos partes positivas dos momentos maus. A parte positiva deste momento mau é o dinheiro que vem e a oportunidade de modernização. Mas também com isto não quero desvalorizar a questão do investimento público, que é também importante para garantir naturalmente também melhor qualidade de vida e para dar suporte também à economia para poder ter níveis de produtividade superiores. E nesse aspecto, obviamente que o investimento ao nível, por exemplo, do Serviço Nacional de Saúde, para que possa ter uma resposta mais capaz. O investimento, por exemplo, ao nível da resposta da justiça, seja no patamar económico, para a justiça não ser como hoje é, muitas vezes um entrave ao investimento, por exemplo, e à atividade económica, mas também justiça em paralelo, não com os dinheiros, não com este dinheiro, mas enfim, com o Orçamento de Estado português, também uma reforma da justiça que nos dê garantias, que não dá, hoje não dá, de combate, por exemplo, à corrupção, e, enfim, corrupção num sentido largo, não é? Porque corrupção é um crime específico, quando nós falamos em corrupção em termos políticos, estamos a abranger mais outros conceitos, e portanto, esse combate. E portanto, há aqui diversos investimentos públicos que têm de ser complementares àquilo que é o objetivo principal, que é fortalecer as empresas, e aqui, por exemplo, também, pois o como é que é mais difícil, mas obviamente que uma aposta mais forte na ferrovia, que acho que é consensual a nível nacional, seja por razões ambientais, seja mesmo pela ligação, digamos assim, e pela mobilidade dentro do país e para fora do país, parece-me também vital, como há muitas outras coisas que são importantes, mas, enfim, deixar aqui só estas notas, as empresas em primeiro lugar, mas sem tabus ideológicos dizendo, bem, tudo que é público é mau e não interessa para nada. Não. Se tudo que é público é mau, então é ao contrário, então temos de pôr bem. O que é público é também muito relevante na nossa vida coletiva e muito relevante para construir uma competitividade melhor e uma produtividade melhor de toda a nossa economia. E é o que se me oferece dizer nestas breves palavras, de participação, mas acima de tudo de apoio a esta iniciativa do Instituto Sá Carneiro.
Well, thank you very much. Toda a gente me está a ouvir? Are you everybody hearing me? Okay. Eu vou despedir-me em português e em inglês, mas se calhar primeiro em inglês que os nossos... I will say the last remarks in English because our speakers are looking like we didn't understand the word. I want to say thank you, first of all, to Instituto Francisco Sá Carneiro, to Foundation Konrad Adenauer, and to the EPP for this initiative. I want to thank very, very much to our speakers. It was really interesting. And I want to thank our audience here in the room and also our online audience. I heard it was quite a few people, quite a few people. And I guess we all go home with a lot to think about. So thank you very much and have a nice weekend. And bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Obrigada.